Okay, let's talk rafter cutting, specifically how to gang cut your rafters using a chainsaw and some beam saws. So first things first, I'm setting all of these 2x12 rafters, I think they were 20 footers, maybe 22 footers, but I'm pretty sure they were 20 footers, on I-joist racks crowned down. That represents the top of the roof plane. If your rafters are like all over the place, you can kind of sort them, or you could even shim them up so that they're smooth on the drywall side. That didn't matter for me because it was attic space. I typically take my first rafter and cut it, lay it down in the racks, and then stack the rest of them. So what I'm doing here is I'm just transferring all of those marks to the opposite side, and then I'm gonna either snap lines or use my T-square to connect all of those dots. What each of these lines will represent would be the heel of the seat cut, the plumb portion of the bird's mouth, and then also the plumb portion of the tail if you choose to cut the tails, which I did in this case, partly because we already had all of our soffits pre-attached to our overhangs. You can find the video on my channel where we pre-install all of our soffits before we lift the walls. Saves us a lot of ladder work. I'm gonna really do my best in this video not to ramble. Easier said than done. What I'm doing is I'm setting the angle of the saw to the rafter I've already cut because I know that's a perfect cut. Instead of trusting the base plate, which I don't on anything like this, I set the saw to the cut. Now, I didn't need to make the cut. I could have aligned it with a mark, but I just find this easier, especially if it's one person. That is the Bigfoot head cutter XL that is bolted onto the saw. Again, check the description below for the link. I use a steel MS391, I believe it is, because it's got loads of power. And I'm cutting 2x12s, in some cases to like 60 or even 70 degree angles. That doesn't happen very often, but 45 degrees is generally about as steep as we go. And you'll see why as we go through. I always nail a guide. And so at the same time that I set the saw to that angle, I marked the side and now I tack the guide so it's perfectly parallel. Now I've got something to ride the saw up against. I have a fence, right? And I've got the handle on that saw so it's nice and stable. Now, some of you might be thinking, if I cut with the top of the bar, couldn't it kick back and hit me in the chaps? And it is possible that it could do that. But remember, for kickback, you need either the nose of the bar to hit something, or you need some kind of binding action. And as you can see, neither of those is the case here. The saw won't kick back. Cutting with the top of the bar allows all of the dust to shoot toward the ground. It also helps to keep the saw flat. If you cut the opposite direction, the saw tends to want to climb out of the cut, and that can affect your accuracy. Now, I'm going to reverse myself when we get to the tail cuts, but we'll talk about that in a few moments. I'm going to say this more than once throughout the video, let the chainsaw do the work. If you use a sharp chisel tooth chain, the saw is going to do the work. Don't push it, just kind of feather it, as you could hear me roll through that cut. Now I'm on to the tail cut. So same thing, I just checked make sure that the saw didn't move while I was cutting. I marked the 2x12. Remember to mark on the side that doesn't fall off. I know some guys that did that the wrong way learning this. Now, notice that I'm cutting with the bottom of the bar. The reason for that, even though it's dustier and it kind of is blown away from me, it's not really my favorite, but this allows the saw to kind of keep itself flat or pull itself flat. If you go the other way, it's really a fight. The bar wants to climb out of the cut. The saw literally lifts out of the cut. So yeah, even though this doesn't look as clean and all that good stuff, this is just what I prefer. Okay, so how do we make the seat cut? Which in this case, because it's a 612 roof, I need to be able to tilt my saw to 63.5 degrees in round numbers. So I use the Bigfoot Tools 10¼ inch beam saw with the swing table. Again, bigfoottools.com, link will be in the description. I bought this saw, oh man, way back in like 2003, I believe it was. Make sure that you have a nice thick gauge cord or you can burn up the motor. I like to use a nice sharp Diablo blade. And that saw basically only gets used for this kind of work, so the blade lasts a long time. You have to feather it as you go through the cut. It's going to want to bind on you. Sometimes it's worth going through at half depth and then repeating the cut at full depth. This wasn't that big of a deal. Now, This is the skill saw 10¼ inch beam saw that only bevels, I think, to 45 or 50. Plenty for me to make my 6/12 plumb cut coming back the other direction. Something that you'll notice too when we get to the next segment is that at full depth, the Bigfoot is about 3¾ inch depth. So that's what your seat cut would be. I forget what it is that I needed on this roof, like 4½or 5. Anyway, it will make sense here in just a few moments. Now this saw takes a lot of juice. So make sure you have a nice, big, thick extension cord and feather the cut, because at full depth, it will cut 6¼ inches. Take your time. It's not worth tripping the power and then having to run out to the power pole. You can kind of see there in the bird's mouth, I think, that the seat cut didn't quite go all the way, and the plumb cut also doesn't go all the way. So the fact is, I'm gonna have to rip my tails in large part because we have the closed soffits already attached to the building. So this is really honestly the slow part. If you're gang cutting and things stay in the racks like this and all your cuts finish, it's like one and done with each cut. So I imagine some of you at least are a little skeptical. Is this really faster than handling each 20-foot 2x12 and a pattern and making all the individual cuts? And the short answer is yes, even though I have to rip these tails. Now what I want you to notice in this next segment is how quick this process is. All I have to do is flip it over, scribe it with my, because I'm using a 5½ inch tail, is I just need to scribe the tail width. To be honest, I could save that step and just eyeball it, and it wouldn't matter because it's hiding in the soffits. But I just use my square. So the first cut will go a little slow because there's not room. It picks up speed as I go, and not just because I sped up the footage because I didn't want to bore you, but all told, this maybe takes 10 minutes, and I forget how many rafters are there. I can cut the entire roof, this particular roof, by myself in 1 hour with these tools. It went slower because of all the camera setup, but you'll see at the end of the video what this roof looked like. I don't think there's anybody else that can hand pack 20-foot rafters, 2x12 rafters, cut all of them identically in less time than that hour. But I want to be totally honest. I was doing this all for the sake of the video, so I wanted to do it alone so I knew how long it took, and I was beat because those are heavy rafters. By the way, this is only half the roof. This is only the section of roof that gets tails. Anyway, that'll make sense as we go along. So notice here, I'm not going back and forth too much. You flip them over, scribe them, cut them. Kyle came up for the very end, so he helped me stack those last rafters. You can see the rhythm here. It's just scribe, cut, kind of kick the scrap out of the way. Kyle helped me stack that last set of rafters. That's it. So this is all of the rafters with tails for the main roof. By the way, all the cutoffs, save. That's perfect for blocking. You'll see that in just a few minutes. Okay, it might look like more of the same, but now this batch of rafters is going to sit in hangers, but I ordered them the same length as the rafter stock with tails. Now here's why, is I can set up the guide, very quickly cut this 20 rafters, whatever it was. Instead of making them all flush, that can take longer than cutting. Set up the guide nice and square across the material and make one cut coming across. Now this time it's a square cut. Can you guess why I'm square cutting the ends, knowing that these are gonna sit in hangers? I know you guys are smart. You've probably already figured it out. So I'll just tell you. You win 3 gold stars if you figured it out. I'm registering the end. What I decided to do was cut all of my bird blocks and ridge blocks 22 7/16. You never cut a block at 22½, 22 6, or 22 7/16. So one cut. Now I'm gonna do the same thing parallel, 22 7/16. I'm double checking that the saw is perfectly square. Now, are you a skeptic? Can the saw really cut 2x12 perfectly square? Okay, watch the process and then you tell me. This tool, by the way, is a great way to cut eye joists, gang cut eye joists, especially when they're still banded. It's a great way to cut units of 2x10 or 2x12 for floor joists where they lap on beams and they don't have to be perfect. But is this tool good enough to cut perfectly square as if I just used that Makita? Stay tuned. Now, if you've looked at Bigfoot's website, you see that they did have a head cutter and then the head cutter XL. We had the original, but then we asked them to make a bigger one, and that's what resulted in the XL. Is it gonna be square? You tell me. What does it look like? Let's watch that again. Now that is a thing of beauty. Noise. All right, skeptics, you've earned your skepticism. Is it square? Sure look like it. Oh, it's perfectly square. So there it is. Can the tool work? Yes, if you use the tool properly, if you take the time to make sure that it's square, don't force the saw, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Notice the table saw on the left. Shane is ripping all of our cutoffs into the blocking because we like to bevel the blocking, and you'll see why in just a moment. So this just reinforces the process. Always use a guide. I know some guys freehand and it works really well. I am not a freehander. I always make the joke and people correct me. I'm freehanding with a guide. No, for me, the guide means that I can focus on the saw and not have to be following a line. I know I'm gonna follow that line right on the run. So I don't know, it just simplifies for me. It's just all about nice, smooth, easy. I'm cutting a 6/12 plumb cut on 2x12 Doug fir. If you only need to use 2x8 for rafters, or maybe even 2x6, then this works even better. I would just say use a smaller saw. Now remember that the rafters are upside down, so they're crowned up, but then face the ground. I'm cutting along the bottom or underside of the rafter. On the other side, my tape is hooked to the heel of the cut we just made. Then I measure to the heel of the seat cut and then the plumb cut, transfer those and snap a line. Now all of my lines are perfectly parallel to the cut I just made, to that ridge cut. That's what we want, is we want things to be perfectly parallel. Now I'm just gonna make the seat cut again. Remember it's like what, 63.5 degrees? But because I don't need the full depth, you notice that I backed the saw out just a little bit, and that actually does make it cut a little faster. The first half of that cut, of course, is sped up, but now you can see the process. It's okay that I overcut, that's all just scrap blocks. But you see what I mean about the depth. You don't need the full depth at that point. Once again, the guide is dead parallel to the cut I'm about to make. And here we go. Now remember, because I'm cutting opposite of the way I was before, I cut with the bottom of the bar so that the bar doesn't want to climb out of the cut. It's a little messier. It looks really cool, especially in slow motion. One thing I think you can tell from the dust that's coming out of the saw is because I'm using a sharp chisel tooth chain, the sawdust itself is more like little ribbons of wood, and that is a key thing to making this process work. Obviously, we want a dull... kind of an idiot, am I? We want, yeah, I knew I was thinking. We want a sharp chain and we want a chisel tooth chain. It cuts lumber really well. Okay, so those will all land against the beam. So from the inside, here's how it looks. Rafters are hanging to the beam. These blocks are cut out of our guardrails, and then we run them through the table saw so that they have the bevel. That's because we need the nailing surface to transfer the roof load to the beam. The beam, of course, sits on the wall at the top. Same thing. It's really quick to run through. Really quick to run through the table saw. This bad boy is awesome. Screw hook.
It's like every time there's something going on. So the beams, we always leave out the studs here so we can put a screw through it to temporarily hold them. The strap there will get nailed after the fact, and it's nailed down to the plate there.
Yeah, I can do it.
And that way this whole run is all strapped together.
Try.
A little more up and you got it. If you can't get it, I can always walk down and get it.
You want me to do it?
Walk down.
I can do it.
Yeah, let's try it. Let's get Jimmy to do it.
All right.
One.
Now that I've trash talked, I'm totally gonna blow it because the camera's going.
So one, Shane, directly underneath is never the best. It's always better to be out, so that way you can lob it away from you. You just have to be really strong. Ah! You blew it! Now this is a tough piece.
I had to stretch.
Ow!
And there's the world's most simple roof. Now you know why I picked it to show how to gang cut. Anyway, about half of those rafters hang into those beams. The other half, of course, land on walls and have overhangs. Which, remember, all those overhangs were pre-attached before we lifted the walls. So I can cut all of those by myself in an hour. I'm hustling, kind of hurts a little bit because they're heavy. I'd rather use a second guy, but it is a whole lot easier and faster than cutting them individually off of the pattern. Having said that, you do have to invest in the tools, and it does take some practice. But I hope that clarifies how you gang cut. If you didn't have your soffits in, or if it was open soffits, you'd save even more time by not ripping the tails. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. But can we just appreciate for a moment just how beautiful a hand-cut roof looks, especially on a nice, sunny September day.